Why did she come back here, of all places? That thought lingered in the misty rain as she stepped off the ferry, her boots striking the wooden planks in measured rhythm. The storm had rolled in fast, smearing the horizon into a wall of gray. The air smelled of salt and old rope, the kind of smell that clung to you even if you didn't want it to. To anyone watching, she was nothing unusual, just another traveler, a drifter carrying two worn duffels and the weight of too many miles. But her eyes told a different story. They didn't wander, didn't dart like someone lost. They locked forward steady, as if the storm couldn't touch her. She walked toward the checkpoint at Naval Base like a woman heading into a grocery store. No hesitation, no falter in her step. Yet every guard who spotted her tightened their grip on their weapon. Something about her didn't sit right. Civilians didn't just stroll up here, not unless they were lost or reckless. And this one, she carried herself like she belonged. "Ma'am, stop right there," the gate guard barked, raising a gloved hand. She didn't stop, not right away. Instead, she slid one hand into her jacket, slow and deliberate. The MPs on the edge of the perimeter shifted, one of them lowering his hand toward his holster. She pulled out something weathered and thin, a military ID card, edges frayed like it had survived 3 lifetimes. She handed it to the guard with quiet finality. The name on it read, Lieutenant Hale. The guard studied it, his brow furrowed. He glanced up at her, then back down at the card. "This expired 3 years ago," he said. His voice carried a hard edge, but beneath it, a flicker of unease. She said nothing, just held his gaze, calm, steady, as if daring him to challenge her. Before he could press, 2 MPs closed in from behind. Their radios crackled, one whispering into his earpiece. The taller of the two grabbed her arm. His grip was firm, professional. "That's enough. Ma'am, you're under arrest for impersonating a naval officer, specifically a SEAL. You have the right to remain silent." Her lips twitched, the faintest trace of a smile or maybe relief. She didn't resist, didn't argue, didn't even blink. By the time the cuffs snapped shut, the rain had soaked into her jacket, dripping down her temple. She didn't flinch when they guided her past the gate, didn't lift her head as curious eyes followed. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment all along. Hours later, under buzzing fluorescent lights and the smell of bleach and damp concrete, she sat across from Commander Briggs. He was a man weathered by 3 decades in uniform, with creases on his face carved by salt air and suspicion. His presence filled the room, not loud, not aggressive, but heavy, the way years of authority pressed down without effort. "You're telling me you were a SEAL?" His voice was skeptical but measured, like a surgeon probing an old wound. Across the steel table, Hale sat cuffed, shoulders back, posture calm. Her hair clung damp against her temple, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. Briggs leaned forward, his fingers drumming against the folder in front of him. "We checked the records, every single one, and guess what? There's no Hale, no Alex Hale, no female listed in any SEAL team roster during the years you claim. None." She didn't blink. "That's because those records are classified beyond your clearance." Her voice was steady, almost soft, but with a weight that carried across the table. Briggs smirked, leaning back. Convenient. She let silence hang between them, the kind of silence that wasn't defensive but deliberate. Her gaze shifted, not to him but to the mirror on the wall. A one-way mirror. Someone else was watching. Briggs caught that look and bristled. He had dealt with dozens of fakes over the years, wannabes who memorized jargon, forged tattoos, thought they could slip through by sounding authentic. But this woman, she hadn't made a single rookie mistake. Her terminology, her calmness, even the way she sat, it unsettled him. "You know what's funny?" he said finally, trying to regain footing. "Most of the impersonators, they trip up. They say boot camp when they mean Bud S. They call it a badge instead of a trident. But you walked in here clean, no slip-ups. That's impressive." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "But impressive doesn't make it true." Still, she didn't respond. The silence pressed harder. And for the first time in a long while, Briggs felt something in the pit of his stomach he didn't like. Doubt. Time stretched. Then, just as the MPs prepared to transfer her to federal custody, the steel door creaked open. The air shifted. An older man entered, and the room seemed to shrink around him. His uniform was immaculate, his chest lined with ribbons like a wall of history. His presence was a storm contained inside a man, controlled, but impossible to ignore. Admiral Robert Cain. The MP stiffened. Briggs shot to his feet instinctively. "At ease," Cain said quietly. His voice was deep, commanding without effort. His eyes, however, were fixed on the woman. "Sir," Briggs began, "she's under arrest for—" "Remove the cuffs." Briggs blinked. "Sir, she's—" "I said remove them." The hesitation lasted only a second before the cuffs clicked open. Cain circled the table slowly, studying her as if confirming a memory. His eyes didn't leave hers. Then, in a tone that carried the weight of both command and request, he said, "Roll up your left sleeve." For the first time hesitated. Not long, just a flicker, a heartbeat. Then she, pushing up the damp fabric of her jacket. The tattoo came into view. Not the standard seal trident, the one inked by countless and enthusiasts. No, this was different. A variant, precise, intricate. The kind only a handful of operatives in the world had ever earned, those tied to a covert, experimental program whispered only in corridors, Project Sentinel. Cain's eyes lingered on it, his jaw tightened. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its steel. It was softer now, almost reverent. "That tattoo's authentic." Briggs frowned, his voice rising in disbelief. "Sir, what are you saying?" Cain's gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "I'm saying this woman isn't impersonating anyone. She is who she says she is." The room went still. For the first time since stepping off that ferry, shoulders eased. Not fully, not safe, but eased like a weight had shifted, one she had carried for far too long. Briggs swallowed hard, retreating into silence. He wasn't cleared for whatever storm had just entered the room. He knew enough to stop asking. Cain pulled out a chair and sat across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Years of history, of buried secrets, seemed to hum in the air between them. Finally, Cain broke the silence. "I thought you'd never come back." Her eyes locked on his. "I wouldn't have if I had a choice." The words hung heavy. What choice? What truth had dragged her back here, through the storm, into the cuffs, into the very base that had erased her name? And what would it cost her to finally speak it? What happens to a soldier erased from history? The question clung to the sterile air as Cain and sat across from each other, their silence louder than any interrogation. The Admiral's eyes had softened, but his posture stayed firm, as if unsure whether he was welcoming back an old ally or confronting a ghost that should have stayed buried. Cain spoke first, his tone low. "Back then you weren't Hale, not officially. What name did you serve under?" Her lips curved faintly, not into a smile, but something between irony and weariness. "Alex, just Alex, a 19-year-old kid from the wrong side of Detroit who thought the Navy would be a way out." Her voice carried no pride, no bitterness, just fact stripped bare. Cain remembered. He leaned back, his mind flicking through classified reports, blurred photos, mission logs that had never seen daylight. Alex had been different. Raw but sharp, determined but not reckless, and more than that, resilient in ways most recruits weren't. "You survived things no one else should have survived," Cain said quietly. Her gaze dropped to the table. The fluorescent light carved shadows beneath her eyes, aging her not by years but by miles walked. Survived, sure, but at what cost? Briggs shifted uncomfortably at the edge of the room, but Cain silenced him with a glance. This wasn't about records anymore. This was about truth. His mind drifted, unbidden, back to the beginning. The nights in Detroit where gunfire echoed through cracked windows, where escape wasn't hope but survival instinct. She had joined the Navy not to serve a flag, not at first, but to run from the streets that had already written her obituary. Boot camp hadn't broken her. Neither had the grueling weeks of advanced training. If anything, they had sharpened her edges, forged her into something more precise. While others folded under pressure, she learned to breathe through pain, to welcome silence where others feared it. And someone noticed. She was pulled aside one night after a timed navigation drill, a commander with unreadable eyes asking her to stay behind. She thought she was in trouble, maybe being discharged. Instead, the man slid a folder across the table, its contents blacked out save for a single phrase: Project Sentinel. A program that didn't exist, at least not on paper. "You're saying they recruited you into something outside the SEAL pipeline?" Cain asked, though he already knew the answer. She nodded. "They said I wasn't built for the mold, but maybe I could break one." Her words hung in the air. Project Sentinel wasn't about making more SEALs. It was about testing limits, physical, psychological, moral. Could you take someone from outside the accepted standard and push them not just to endure the impossible, but to master it? Could you create soldiers who lived in the gray, where recognition would never follow and accountability would never exist? Her training had been brutal in its precision. Weeks without sleep, locked in dark rooms, her body broken down and rebuilt, her mind tested with simulations designed to crack the strongest will. She remembered being submerged in icy water, heart hammering, as instructors whispered lies through headsets. "Your team has abandoned you. You're already dead." She remembered being forced to make choices in drills where no right answer existed save one: survive no matter what. Survive and never speak of it. She passed, somehow, and she bore the mark of that passage on her skin, the tattoo Cain had recognized. Not decoration, not vanity, a scar disguised as ink, proof that she had done something the government itself. But the missions, those were worse. She shifted in her chair now, her eyes fixed not on Cain but on the far wall, as if replaying ghosts she had tried to lock away. "There was one mission," she said softly. "The one that ended it all. We went in knowing the risk. Extraction window was tight and the target," she cut herself off. Her throat tightened, her jaw flexed. "The target mattered more than we did." Cain studied her carefully. He had heard rumors, fragments, a black ops insertion gone wrong, a team scattered, reports marked terminated for operational security. "What happened?" She met his gaze then, eyes sharp with something between pain and defiance. "What you were told is what happened." Her words were a blade, cutting through the years of silence. Cain frowned. "We confirmed." "No," she interrupted, her voice rising for the first time. "You confirmed what they wanted you to, what they needed you to believe." Her hands clenched, then loosened against the steel table. She drew in a slow breath, steadying herself. "One of ours didn't die that night, Admiral. He was taken." The words dropped heavy, a truth she had carried like lead in her chest. Cain's eyes hardened. Mason Graves. He remembered the name, Chief Petty Officer, listed KIA, body unrecovered. "That's not possible," Cain said, though even as he spoke, his conviction wavered. Her voice was quiet now but firm. "I've been tracking intel for the last year. He's alive, and he's in enemy hands." The room chilled. Briggs shifted again, his face pale. Cain rubbed his temples, wrestling with the storm this revelation stirred. If Mason Graves was alive, then everything they had buried, every report, every lie, every sealed file was built on sand. "Why now?" Cain asked finally. Her eyes locked on his, steady as ever. "Because the window to get him back is closing. And if we don't act, not only will he die, but the information he carries will put every SEAL team at risk. Every one of them. He knows codes, protocols, operational patterns. He was Sentinel. You know what that means." Cain did. He knew all too well. He exhaled, leaning back in his chair. The weight of his ribbons, his stars, suddenly felt heavier. Authorizing any move like this would be reckless, unsanctioned, career-ending. But leaving graves behind wasn't just immoral, it was dangerous. Across the table sat motionless. She wasn't pleading, she wasn't bargaining, she was presenting fact. The kind of fact you didn't ignore. Cain stared at her for a long moment. Then he asked the only question left. If I back you, who else can you trust? Her silence was answer enough. How do you rebuild trust when your very existence was erased? That was the question pressing on's chest as she sat alone in the holding room, the weight of Cain's deliberation hanging like smoke in the air. She had laid everything bare, broken through the silence she had kept for years. Now all she could do was wait. When the steel door creaked open again, Cain entered without his usual storm. His face was harder now, drawn in shadow, like a man who had just signed away something he could never get back. You know what you're asking me to risk, he said. Lifted her eyes, calm, steady. But beneath that calm was a flicker of something else, a fear she rarely admitted even to herself. It isn't about risk, Admiral, it's about loyalty. He'd have come for me. Cain exhaled through his nose, then gave the smallest nod. Decision made. You'll have a team, but it won't be official. No records, no oversight. If this goes south, you're ghosts. Her lips curved faintly. Not a smile, just ghosts were all she'd ever been. By nightfall, arrangements had already been set in motion. Cain had called in debts from men who owed him their lives, whispered names into secure lines that had never seen daylight. 3 operatives arrived on base under the guise of training exercises, each hand-picked for loyalty above all else. They gathered in a dimly lit hangar, far from curious eyes. Stood apart at first, her duffel at her feet, listening as Cain introduced them. Chief Warrant Officer, 17 years with the teams. You won't find steadier hands on the ground. Nodded once, his expression unreadable. Petty Officer First Class Dane Miller, sharpshooter. If you can see it, he can hit it. Miller cracked a faint grin, but it didn't reach his eyes. And Lieutenant Turner, pilot. He's flown into places most of us wouldn't dream of leaving alive. Turner raised 2 fingers in lazy salute. Cain's gaze shifted too, and you already know her. Silence lingered. They didn't ask questions, didn't pry. Men like these didn't need stories, they needed orders. Still, felt the weight of their eyes. Did they wonder who she really was? Did they see her as one of them or as a stranger wearing an old ghost's uniform? She stepped forward, laying a map across a crate. Her voice was clipped, efficient. Muscle memory. The target is a compound 2 clicks outside of. Surveillance confirms our man being held here. High walls. Multiple patrols. Cameras on the perimeter. Intel says there's a 30-minute window at shift change when defense is thin. We go in during that gap. Her finger traced routes on the map, marking entry points, guard rotations. The others leaned in, absorbing every word. She didn't waste breath on rallying speeches. She gave them the facts, the plan, the kind of clarity soldiers lived on. When she finished, silence stretched. Miller was the first to speak. Looks clean on paper, but you and I both know. No plan survives first contact, said flatly. He nodded, test passed. Later, as they prepped gear in silence, approached her. He didn't speak right away, just checked the straps on his rifle, the buckles on his harness. Finally, he said, you move like someone who's done this before. Kept her eyes on her own gear. I have. Studied her not with suspicion but curiosity. Then why don't I know your name? She met his gaze then, the kind of look that didn't give answers but warned against pressing for them. Nodded, accepting the boundary. Some truths weren't meant for words. Hours later, the roar of a transport jet filled the night sky. They boarded in silence, duffels and rifles strapped tight. Cain was there at the ramp, his presence heavy in the dim floodlights. This never happened, he said. His voice carried not just authority but something else, the weight of trust. Bring him home. Paused at the foot of the ramp, eyes meeting his one last time. No salute, no handshake, just a nod, sharp and final. She turned and climbed aboard. Inside, the aircraft vibrated with steady power. The men strapped in, checked weapons, adjusted straps, sat near the rear, her hands folded, eyes closed. Sleep didn't come. Instead, memories did. Detroit nights, gunshots cracking like fireworks, the recruiter's office smelling of stale coffee and desperation. The first day at Bud S., sand grinding into her skin as instructors shouted until their voices went hoarse. The cold water, the silence of isolation, the drills where you learned quickly that hesitation meant death. And then Mason. She remembered his laugh, the kind that carried warmth into the coldest nights. He had been her anchor and sentinel, the one who reminded her that humanity still existed in a place built to strip it away. He'd been older, steadier, always with a word at the right moment. And now he was a ghost she had refused to bury. Her eyes snapped open. Across from her, Miller was watching, not unkindly, just studying like a man trying to read a language he didn't understand. She held his gaze until he finally looked away. Hours blurred into silence, broken only by the hum of engines. When the red light flicked on near the ramp, they rose in unison, each movement practiced, automatic. Cain's voice echoed in memory. If this goes south, you're ghosts. Good, she had always been comfortable in the shadows. The ramp lowered, wind screaming into the cabin. Below, the ocean stretched into endless dark. They stepped forward, one by one, until was the last. She glanced once at the night sky, then leapt into the void. The wind roared past her, cold and merciless. For a moment, suspended between earth and sky, she felt weightless, free. Then training took over, arms tucked, body angled, altimeter checked, chute pulled. The canopy snapped open above her, jerking her into silence. She drifted, invisible against the night. Below, the black smear of jungle waited. She landed hard, rolled, rose in silence. Around her, shapes emerged from the dark, Miller, Turner, shadows regrouping. She gave a single-hand signal, move. They slipped into the trees without a word, the jungle swallowing them whole. And for the first time in years felt the familiar rhythm return, every motion precise, every breath measured, fear pushed aside, replaced by focus. But beneath it all, beneath the calm and control, a single thought pulsed steady in her chest. Don't fail him again. What does silence sound like when it could mean life or death? Listen to it now, the jungle at night, thick with humidity, its canopy blotting out the stars. Every rustle of leaves could have been wind, or it could have been something else. A patrol, a mistake waiting to happen. The team moved like shadows, feet sinking into mud without sound. The air clung heavy to their skin, sweat forming even when their pace slowed. They had hours until dawn, and that meant hours to move unseen. The compound was 2 kilometers north. The maps told one story, but she knew the ground would tell another. Her hand lifted once, signaling stop. The men froze instantly, rifles raised. Through the night vision glow, she saw the faint glint of wire stretched low across the path. A trip line. She crouched, fingers brushing the earth, and followed its line to a cluster of camouflaged stakes. Claymore mine. She motioned too. He crouched beside her, studied it, then gave a low whistle through his teeth. Without a word, he clipped the wire and disarmed the trigger. She gave a nod, then raised her hand forward. Move. The others followed without a question. That was the rhythm of men who trusted each other with more than their lives. But trust was harder for her. Every step reminded her that she had been erased once, buried beneath lies and silence. Could she lead again? Would they follow her into hell if it came to that? She didn't know. She only knew one thing: Mason was ahead. By the time they reached the overlooking the compound, the first thin glow of moonlight cut through the clouds. The facility loomed below, concrete walls topped with wire, watchtowers at each corner, and floodlights sweeping lazy arcs across the yard. Turner crouched beside her, binoculars raised. 2 guards on the south gate, 3 more rotating the towers, cameras every 20 yards. Miller smirked faintly. And here I thought we came for a challenge. Didn't answer. She studied the rhythm of lights, the intervals of patrols. It was like listening to a heartbeat, irregular at first but steady once you tuned in. She breathed with it, waited, counted. Then she moved. Down the slope across the underbrush, her body sinking into muscle memory. Followed close, then Miller, then Turner. They reached the outer fence, its wire glinting faintly. Clipped it, steady hands working in silence. The gap widened just enough for them to slip through, one by one. Inside the perimeter, everything slowed. Guards walked their routes, rifles slung casually, unaware of what threaded between them. Hugged the shadows, signaling left, right, halt, move. Every motion was crisp, sharp. The kind of language only soldiers spoke without sound. They reached the first building, squat concrete, barred windows, a steel door with rust at the edges. Tested the handle. Locked. Pulled a small pouch from her vest, slid 2 tools into the lock, twisted. The click was soft, almost invisible, but it echoed in her chest like thunder. Inside, the air reeked of mildew and sweat. A single bulb flickered overhead, casting long shadows down the narrow hall. They moved room to room, empty bunks, storage crates, a mess hall with overturned chairs. Then a sound. A metallic clink, faint but sharp from deeper inside. The team froze, raised her hand, signaling silence. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her breathing stayed controlled, steady. She edged forward, 1 step at a time, rifle raised. The hallway opened into a small cell block. 3 doors. 2 stood open, empty. The third was locked, a heavy bar across its frame. Behind it, movement. She pressed closer, peering through the narrow slit. A face stared back, gaunt and bruised, eyes sunken but alive. Her breath caught. Mason Graves. For a moment the world shrank. It wasn't the compound or the mission or the years of silence. It was just him, alive. His lips parted, his voice a rasp. Alex. She swallowed hard, forcing her focus. No time. Her hands moved quickly, unclipping the bar, forcing the lock. It groaned, loud in the silence. Covered the hall, Miller raised his rifle toward the far corridor. Finally, the lock gave. The door swung open. Mason staggered forward, weak, his body trembling with effort, caught his arm, steadying him. His weight was less than she remembered, bones sharp beneath skin. "Can you walk?" she whispered. He nodded faintly, but his eyes told another story. Pain, weeks, maybe months of it, still he stood. He always had. They moved quickly, retracing steps, guiding him between them. Every second was heavy, the silence sharper now, because silence never lasted. And then it broke. An alarm wailed, shrill and merciless. Lights flared across the compound. Shouts rose in the distance. Floodlights cut through the dark, slicing across the yard. His heart slammed, but her voice stayed even. Move now. They bolted for the gap in the fence, Mason's weight dragging against her arm. Miller fired once, a guard dropping before he could sound the whistle at his lips. Took point, clearing the path with precise bursts. The compound erupted. Boots thundered, rifles clattered, voices barked orders in a language knew too well. Floodlights swept over them, locking onto their shadows. Bullets cracked. She shoved Mason down, felt the sting as one grazed her shoulder, hot pain slicing through muscle. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself forward. Pain didn't matter. Not now. They reached the fence, slipped through the cut wire, bodies pressed into the dirt as rounds smacked against the metal. Turner tossed over his shoulder. It burst white, screams echoing. "Go," barked, hauling Mason upright. They plunged into the jungle, branches whipping against their faces, mud sucking at their boots. Behind them, the compound roared alive. Searchlights cut through the canopy, dogs barking, engines revving. Every breath burned, every step a gamble. Mason stumbled, his weight nearly pulling her down, but she refused to let go. She wouldn't fail him again. Not this time. Minutes stretched into eternity before the sounds behind them dulled, swallowed by the jungle. They collapsed against a fallen log, Mason gasping, sweat pouring down his bruised face. He turned to her, eyes glassy but sharp with recognition. Didn't think you'd come." She looked at him, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You would have done the same." Scanned the tree line, rifle raised. Miller reloaded with quick, practiced motions. Turner muttered into the comms, voice tight. "Extraction point's hot. We'll have to find another route." Pressed her hand to the wound in her shoulder. Warm blood slicked her fingers, but she ignored it. She met Mason's gaze again. "You're not dying here," she said softly. For a moment, his lips twitched into the ghost of a smile. And then the night swallowed them again. What happens when survival and loyalty pull in opposite directions? Felt the question tear at her as she pushed through the dripping jungle, Mason's weight dragging against her good shoulder. The air was thick, every breath damp and heavy, every sound amplified by adrenaline. Behind them, shouts echoed, soldiers combing the jungle, their searchlights slicing through the canopy like blades. "Faster," she whispered, though her own legs trembled. Glanced back, eyes sharp beneath his night vision goggles. "They're closing in." Turner muttered curses under his breath as he fought through the brush, radio in hand. "Extraction points compromised. Too hot. Command chopper reports heavy fire on approach." Clenched her jaw. No command. No official sanction. The chopper was Cain's arrangement, a ghost flight. If it went down, there would be no recovery, no acknowledgement, just more silence. Mason stumbled again. His body was weak, his breath ragged, but he refused to fall. Tightened her grip on him, ignoring the searing pain from her shoulder wound. Blood seeped through her sleeve, warm against the cold night. Miller fell back to cover them, rifle raised. His voice was low, sharp. "They've got dogs. Won't be long before they cut our trail." His mind raced. Options scattered like broken glass. Jungle thick enough to slow pursuit, but not enough to hide from trained trackers. A river somewhere east, maybe. Risk of exposure higher there, but water would cut the scent. She exhaled through clenched teeth. "We move east, double time, your point." Didn't argue. He just pushed forward, hacking through dense foliage with a silent efficiency that came from years of practice. Minutes blurred into one another. The jungle pressed, shadows shifting with every flicker of moonlight. Her wound throbbed, pain radiating down her arm. She willed it quiet, focus. One step, then another. Behind her, Mason's breathing rasped. Each sound cut into her like a blade. He was alive. She had found him, but alive wasn't enough. She had to keep him that way. The first burst of gunfire shattered the night. Rounds tore through branches overhead, splinters raining down. Miller spun, dropping to one knee, returning fire in sharp, controlled bursts. Contact. Dove behind a fallen tree, shouting, "Cover left." Shoved Mason down, shielding him with her own body as she raised her rifle one-handed. Pain seared through her shoulder, but she ignored it, firing toward the muzzle, flashes in the dark. Screams echoed, some there, some not. Turner lobbed a grenade. The explosion rocked the jungle, light flaring, earth shuddering. For a moment, silence. Then more shouts, more boots pounding. "They're pushing us," Miller yelled. His pulse hammered, but her voice cut through the chaos, calm and steady. "Fall back, east, move." They broke contact, sprinting through underbrush, ducking low as more rounds zipped past. Her chest burned, lungs screaming for air, but she didn't stop. Mason stumbled, nearly falling, and she yanked him upright, her body carrying both their weights. At last the ground sloped downward. The faint roar of water reached her ears. The river. They burst through the tree line and onto muddy banks. The water churned black, rushing fast and cold. Miller grimaced. "Great, a river. You want us to swim with a wounded man and a pack on our backs." "It'll break their dogs," shot back. "It's our only shot." Didn't hesitate. He stepped into the water, current swirling around his legs. Turner followed, cursing under his breath. Guided Mason into the shallows, his body trembling as the cold bit into his skin. He hissed through clenched teeth but nodded, forcing himself forward. She pressed against him, half dragging, half supporting. The current tugged hard, threatening to rip them apart. Every step was a battle. Mud sucked at her boots, her wound screamed with fire. But she pushed forward, teeth clenched, eyes locked on the opposite bank. Halfway across, shots cracked from the tree line behind them. Muzzle flashes lit the jungle. Bullets slapped the water. "Go, go," shouted returning fire. Miller fired back in bursts, his face grim, his jaw tight. The river surged around them. Turner slipped, disappearing beneath the surface, then resurfaced gasping. His heart slammed, but she couldn't stop. Mason clung to her, his lips pale, eyes glassy. They reached the far bank, scrambling up mud and roots. Miller covered them, firing until his magazine ran dry, then sprinted across, bullets chasing his heels. When the team regrouped on solid ground, all of them were drenched, gasping, trembling from cold and adrenaline. Pulled Mason against a tree, checking his pulse, his breathing. Weak but steady, still alive. Crouched beside her, voice low. "We can't keep this up, he's slowing us. They'll catch us if we do." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. His eyes snapped to his, sharp with fury. "We don't leave him." Held her gaze, then gave a tight nod. No argument, just the hard acceptance of a man who knew the cost. Miller exhaled, reloading with hands that shook not from fear but fatigue. Extraction. Turner adjusted the radio, static hissing. "Cain's bird can't get closer without being shot down. Closest LZ is 4 clicks out." 4 clicks through jungle, with a wounded man, with enemies at their back. Looked at Mason, his face drawn, his body failing but his eyes still burning with life. She thought of the promise she had made herself. Don't fail him again. Her voice came steady, even as her body trembled. "Then 4 clicks it is." They moved again, every step heavier, every breath shorter. The jungle felt endless, oppressive. Her shoulder burned with fire, every movement sending shockwaves through her body. She kept her face set, her pace steady. But inside, doubt gnawed. How long could she keep this up? How long before her body betrayed her? Before Mason's body gave out? Before loyalty cost them all their lives? Her mind drifted back to Sentinel training. The instructors had drilled one question into them, again and again. What are you willing to sacrifice? Back then the answer had been simple: anything, everything. But now, looking at Mason's frail body, hearing his ragged breaths, feeling the weight of 3 men who had followed her without question, the answer wasn't simple anymore. Survival and loyalty. One demanded sacrifice. The other demanded devotion. And in this jungle they were tearing each other apart. A branch cracked behind them. The team froze, rifles snapping up. Through the dark, figures emerged, enemy soldiers, rifles raised, eyes gleaming through night vision. His chest tightened. The fight wasn't over, it had barely begun. How many times could you cheat death before it came to collect? Asked herself that as the jungle erupted with gunfire. Shadows moved through the trees, muzzle flashes sparking like lightning. The enemy had found them again. "Contact left," Miller shouted, diving behind a trunk. His rifle barked back, muzzle steady even as rounds shredded bark inches from his face. "Right flank," his voice cut through the chaos, calm and sharp. Moved like muscle memory, dropping into cover and laying down suppressive fire. Turner scrambled into position, tossing a smoke grenade that hissed white clouds into the night. Shoved Mason down behind a log, shielding him with her own body. Her wounded shoulder screamed as she raised her rifle one-handed, firing into the dark. The recoil sent jolts of pain down her arm, but she forced herself steady. Every shot had to count. The jungle was chaos. Dogs barked, soldiers shouted orders in clipped foreign syllables, branches shattered under boots. The air stank of gunpowder and churned mud. "Move, break contact," ordered. They fell back in bursts, two covering while the others moved, then switching, leapfrogging through the trees. Pulled Mason up, half dragging him as they ran. He stumbled, gasped, but his grip on her arm was iron. They broke through a clearing, lungs heaving. The sounds of pursuit grew louder, closer. They weren't outrunning them, not like this. His eyes met hers, grim. "We've got to slow them down." Knew what he meant, and she hated it. "No," she said sharply. "Then none of us make it," snapped back. For a moment silence cracked between them, louder than the gunfire. Then Miller stepped forward, jaw set. "I'll do it. Buy you time." Her chest tightened, she shook her head. "We don't leave anyone." Miller gave a bitter half-smile. "That loyalty, going to get us all killed. But hell, better you owe me one in the next life." Before she could stop him, he broke off, sliding into position behind a rock outcropping. He checked his rifle, loaded his last magazine, then nodded once at her. "Go." Her throat ached, but there was no time for words. She forced Mason forward and Turner close behind. The jungle swallowed them as Miller's rifle cracked, sharp and unyielding. Bursts of return fire lit the clearing. Minutes stretched into eternity. The fight behind them raged, then dulled, then silence. His chest hollowed. Silence meant only one thing. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Not if Miller's choice was going to mean anything. They pushed deeper into the jungle. Her body felt carved from stone, every movement jagged, every breath fire. The blood on her shoulder was sticky now, drying, but the wound burned like a brand. Mason stumbled more often, his strength waning, and Turner took turns helping him forward, but his weight slowed them. Finally, they collapsed against a ridge, gasping. The jungle stretched endless in all directions. No sign of pursuit, but she knew better than to trust it. Turner wiped sweat from his brow, his voice sharp. "We can't keep dragging him like this, not 4 clicks." His eyes snapped to him, blazing. Turner didn't flinch. "I'm saying what we're all thinking. He's slowing us. We'll all die if we keep this pace." Said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. His chest tightened, doubt pressed hard. He wasn't wrong. Every second Mason slowed them increased their odds of being caught, but leaving him, impossible. Her gaze dropped to Mason. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes glazed with exhaustion. But when his eyes met hers, they still burned with that same fire. Don't let me be the reason," he rasped. Her throat ached. Memories surged, Mason's laugh in Sentinel, his steady hand when she had nearly broken under training, the way he had reminded her she was more than just a weapon. She shook her head fiercely. "You're not dead weight, you're family." The word hung heavy, unexpected even to her own ears. Turner looked away, jaw clenched, finally spoke low and steady. "Then we make it work, all of us." They pushed forward again, step by step, breath by breath. Every sound felt amplified, a snapped twig, a shifting leaf, the distant hum of engines. The jungle seemed alive, conspiring to slow them, trap them. At last they reached the edge of another clearing. Beyond it, through the thinning trees, the faint shimmer of moonlight revealed open ground. Flat, too flat. Crouched low, scanning. "LZ's 2 clicks past this. Open ground, they'll expect us to cross here." Frowned, then what? She thought quickly. Diversion, smoke, fast and loud. Turner smirked bitterly. "You love impossible odds." She didn't answer, she just signaled forward. They broke into the clearing, sprinting low. Smoke grenades hissed, white plumes billowing. Gunfire erupted instantly from the tree line opposite. Bullets hissed through the haze. Returned fire, steady and sharp. Turner hauled Mason forward, his arms slung over his shoulder. Fired into the smoke, each shot blind but measured, her teeth clenched against the pain in her shoulder. They reached the far side, crashing back into jungle cover. Her lungs burned, her body shook, but they had crossed. For now. They stumbled deeper, collapsing against a fallen tree. Silence stretched, broken only by ragged breathing. Reloaded with shaking hands. We're running out of ammo. Turner wiped his face. End time. Leaned back against the log, staring at the canopy. Stars flickered faintly between leaves. Her chest rose and fell, slow, heavy. Miller's absence cut into her like a blade. He had bought them minutes, maybe an hour, at the cost of his life. And for what? She looked at Mason, his body trembling but alive. His eyes closed now, lips moving in some silent prayer or thought. Was it enough? Her throat tightened, but she forced herself steady. Leadership wasn't about being fearless. It was about carrying the weight of every choice, every loss, and still moving forward, even when it tore you apart inside. Her voice came quiet, almost to herself. We make it, or we don't, but we don't leave each other. Glanced at her, then nodded once. Turner said nothing, but his silence was agreement. They rose again, pushing forward. The jungle stretched endless, heavy with shadows. Behind them, the hunt still burned. Ahead of them, salvation or death waited. And in his chest, one truth pulsed steady. Leadership isn't about orders. It's about promises you can't afford to break. How much can one body take before it breaks? Felt the answer with every step, every breath that scraped against her ribs, every jolt of pain from her wounded shoulder. The jungle seemed endless, roots clawing at her boots, vines dragging like hands trying to pull her down. They were close, she knew it, 2 clicks, maybe less. The last stretch to the landing zone, but close in miles wasn't close in survival. Moved point, scanning with sharp eyes, rifle ready despite the tremor in his arms. Turner staggered behind, half carrying Mason, whose body seemed to grow heavier with every step. Trailed close, her gaze locked on Mason's pale face. He hadn't spoken in miles, but his eyes stayed open. Alive. Alive was enough, for now. 5 minutes, whispered, glancing back. We should see the clearing soon. Turner muttered through clenched teeth. If we make 5 more minutes. Said nothing. Words felt dangerous, fragile things. They wasted air. They admitted fear. She couldn't afford either. Then the night cracked open. Gunfire roared behind them, shouts echoing. Flashlights cut through the trees, beams slicing like knives. The enemy hadn't lost them. They'd been hurting them, driving them straight toward the clearing. Go, barked. They broke into a sprint, adrenaline forcing legs that had nothing left. The jungle thinned ahead, moonlight spilling through open space. The LZ. Her heart pounded with a sudden, savage hope. Then the sound hit her. Helicopter rotors, distant but growing, the steady thump-thump-thump of salvation. Cain's bird. It was real. But so were the soldiers pouring into the clearing from the opposite side. Dropped to one knee, rifle barking. Turner dragged Mason behind a fallen tree, pulling his pistol free with his other hand. Slid beside them, firing bursts into the advancing line. The night became chaos. Bullets shredded leaves, dirt exploding in sprays. The helicopter roared closer, its spotlight cutting a blazing path across the clearing. We hold, shouted over the gunfire. Hold until that bird lands. Grunted in reply, firing in sharp, controlled bursts. Turner swore under his breath, emptying his pistol and reloading with shaking hands. Mason tried to lift his own weapon, but it slipped from his weak grip. Caught it, pressed his hand down. Not you, she whispered fiercely. Not anymore. The helicopter swept lower, its side door open, a crewman waving frantically. But the enemy pressed harder, their fire growing heavier, closer. One round snapped past ear, hot against her skin. Another struck the log beside Turner, splintering wood. We're not going to hold, Turner shouted. His chest heaved, her mind raced. Choices cut sharper than bullets. They couldn't hold forever, but they didn't need forever, just seconds. Her gaze flicked too. He read her eyes before she spoke. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Go, he said, I'll cover. The words stabbed into her. Not again, not another sacrifice. No, she hissed. Gave a grim smile. Don't argue, Hale. You're the one who said we don't leave each other. I'm not leaving, I'm holding. Her throat ached, but the decision wasn't hers, it was already his. He rose from cover, unleashing a storm of fire. His rifle cracked sharp, steady, cutting down silhouettes in the trees. His voice was a roar now, defiant, as if daring the night itself to stop him. Go! Turner grabbed Mason, hauling him toward the descending helicopter. Stayed a second longer, firing into the tree line beside. Her wounded shoulder screamed, her vision blurred, but she kept shooting. Then's rifle clicked empty. He drew his sidearm, firing until that too ran dry. The last thing saw before Turner yanked her back was standing tall, knife in hand, as shadows swarmed him. The helicopter's skid slammed into the ground. Turner shoved Mason inside, then pushed up behind him. She twisted, firing one last burst toward the tree line before the crew pulled them aboard. The helicopter lurched upward, rotors screaming, rounds sparking against its hull. Collapsed against the floor, chest heaving, ears ringing. Below the clearing shrank, the jungle swallowed the chaos, was gone. The crewman shouted, "We're clear, we're clear." But didn't hear him, not fully. Her eyes were locked on Mason, his body slumped against the wall, his breath ragged but steady, alive. She had done it, brought him back. At what cost? Miller, ghosts now, ghosts because of her. Her throat burned, her vision blurred. For the first time since stepping off that ferry, she felt the weight crush down. The silence she had carried for years roared back louder than ever. She pressed her forehead against the cold metal of the floor, her breath shaking. Loyalty had saved him, but loyalty had killed them. And she didn't know if she could live with either truth. What does it mean to come home when home no longer remembers you? Stared out the helicopter's open door as the coastline of California came into view. Dawn was breaking, soft light spreading across the Pacific, golden against the water. To the men around her, it was salvation. To her, it felt like judgment. Mason sat slumped beside her, his body wrapped in blankets by the crew. He slept now, breath shallow but steady. Turner sat across, silent, eyes hollow. The absence of Miller was loud in the cabin, louder than the rotors. His chest ached with it. Ghosts, again, always ghosts. When the helicopter touched down Cain was waiting on the tarmac. His uniform was pressed sharp, his face unreadable, but his eyes softened as they landed on Mason being carried out. For a moment, the Admiral let his hand brush Mason's shoulder, the faintest sign of something more than duty. Then his gaze shifted too. She stepped off the ramp slowly, every muscle heavy, every step weighed down by what she carried. Her sleeve was dark with dried blood, her eyes sunken from exhaustion. Cain didn't flinch at her state. He had seen worse. He had worn worse. But he said nothing at first, just let silence speak. Finally he asked, "How many?" Her jaw tightened. She forced the words past the lump in her throat. 2. Cain nodded once. No surprise, no judgment, just the acceptance of a truth he had lived with too many times. And Mason. Her eyes flicked toward the stretcher being wheeled away. Alive, for now. Cain exhaled, long and slow, relief mixed with sorrow in the sound. He turned back to her. "You did what you came to do." Her lips twitched, a bitter shadow of a smile. "At what cost?" Cain's gaze didn't waver, always at a cost. The words hit like a stone in her chest, always at a cost. That was the truth they all lived with, the truth she had tried to outrun, only to find it waiting at every turn. They walked together across the tarmac, away from curious eyes. Cain's voice softened. "I kept my promise. No records, no reports. Officially, this never happened." Stopped, so they die in silence too. Cain's jaw flexed. He turned to her, his eyes sharp now. "You think silence erases them. You're wrong. Silence is where they live, in the ones who remember." Her throat ached. She looked away toward the sea. Waves crashed against the shore, steady, relentless, like memory, like guilt. Later, when Mason was stabilized in a quiet wing of the base hospital, sat at his bedside. He looked thinner under the sheets, pale but breathing. Machines hummed soft rhythms around him, but his chest rose and fell steady. When his eyes opened, they found hers immediately, faint but sharp. "You came," he whispered. Her throat tightened. "I came." His lips curved weakly. "Thought I was a ghost." Her hand brushed his, calloused but gentle. "Not yet." Silence stretched, heavy with everything they didn't say. The losses, the years, the weight of what survival meant. Finally, his eyes closed again. Rest claimed him. She sat there long after, the hum of machines the only sound. When she finally left, Cain was waiting in the hall. He held a small box in his hand. He extended it toward her. "What's this?" she asked, her voice wary. "Something the world doesn't have to see," he said quietly. She opened it. Inside lay a trident pin. Real gold, heavy in her palm, not standard issue, not recorded in any logbook. Her breath caught. "Why give me this? You know I can't wear it." Cain's gaze held hers. "Because sometimes paper means nothing. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts." Her hand closed around the pin. Warm, solid, proof if only to herself that she had existed, that she had mattered. She slipped the box back to him. "Keep it. The world isn't ready for an official me." For the first time, Cain's lips curved in something almost like a smile. Not joy, not relief, just understanding. She walked past him then, out toward the docks. The air smelled of salt and rain just as it had the night she arrived. The storm had passed, leaving the sky washed clean. The ferry waited, engines humming low. She boarded without looking back. No speeches, no goodbyes. The sea stretched wide before her, endless and quiet. She leaned against the rail, the trident still warm in her palm, hidden from sight. She thought of Miller, of every ghost she carried. And she whispered, barely audible above the waves, "I remember." The ferry pulled away, cutting through calm waters. The horizon glowed with sunrise, soft and golden. She didn't smile, but she didn't weep either. Because some truths didn't need headlines. They didn't need medals or parades. They only needed to be remembered. And sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted,